Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, and welcome back to Academic Writing Amplified. I'm your host, Kathy Mazak, and I continue to have the longest cold in history. So please excuse my raspy voice and my throat clearings as we dig into today's topic, which is funding freezes. So if you are a regular listener to this podcast, you'll know that over the past year, I've been kind of republishing podcasts that are from my back catalog, because there's over 250 episodes now, grouping them into like a series and, themed by topic. But for the next few weeks, the podcast episodes are going to be new and shiny because it is absolutely time to address all the upheaval that's happening in higher education right now. And I'll say, I'm glad that I didn't try to record any episodes about this or many episodes about this before now, because I think that one of the things that the current administration in the US, which has caused upheaval throughout the world, and especially where most of my audience is, which is the US and Canada, has caused so much upheaval in higher ed. I'm glad I didn't try to talk about it before, because I think what the purpose is, one of the many purposes is to kind of invoke a knee-jerk reaction, invoke a fear and panic reaction. And that is exactly what I'm going to try to not do in these next few podcast episodes. So my purpose for these podcast episodes is to help you as a participant in higher education, in universities and colleges, in research, to ask questions to yourself and think deeply about your purpose in higher ed, what you want to achieve, and what your relationship to higher ed is going to be like for the foreseeable future. So that is my purpose. I am not here to give you advice. I will give a tiny bit of advice, but I'm really here to help guide you through guiding your own mind through what is happening right now in higher education. And we're going to start today talking about funding freezes. So I think the very first most upsetting and upheaval-y thing that happened in this first chunk of the current US administration was the freezing of funds. So many programs, and I can say this because it seems to be in some ways indiscriminate, although it is also discriminating, but many federally funded programs, grant programs, have been cut or have had their funds frozen. So if you're a listener of this podcast, you know that I have a program called Navigate, and it is a 12-week writing and publishing program for professors. And in that program, every week I am meeting with, now we have about 25 in one group and 20 in the other group. So between 40 and 45 professors every week, plus my one-on-one clients. So probably I'm in very regular, weekly or bi-weekly contact with 50 university professors from all over the US and Canada, mostly, also some international. And I know what they're going through, right? I have people who are professors or who are researchers at the CDC. I have people who work for NOAA. I have people who work in all kinds of different types of universities, from Research One universities to community colleges. Like, we have that's one of the beautiful things about the program is this diversity, all kinds of fields. I have engineers, I have health science, nursing, English, history, you name it. We have public health, we have Navigate members and my own, one-on-one clients in those fields, religious studies, psychology, like very different. And everyone is feeling the effect of these cuts or these funding freezes. So I want to talk to you about what I'm seeing as kind of like a somewhat unique position, right? Because I'm seeing what's happening with so many different people at so many different types of universities and so many different fields. So because I have that perspective, I want to share share several thoughts and patterns that I'm seeing. Obviously, like, just to center this conversation, the relationship between the US government and research in higher education, cutting edge research in higher education, is tight and has been tight. And this has been because the US government has created institutions for this purpose, like the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, NIH and NSF, in addition to other federal agencies having budgets and programs like the USDA, the Department of Defense, for grants programs where they work in partnership. They fund research that universities and professors execute in order to make knowledge and solve problems that humans have, especially, humans in the United States of America, because that's their kind of funding jurisdiction, but really all over the world. And because of that relationship between these US built institutions for the advancement of knowledge making and funding research, because of that tight relationship, universities are very dependent on one source of funding for universities are those grants, are the indirect costs that are funded by those grants that help universities maintain their buildings and have equipment and have staff and that kind of thing, right? That would be not impossible, but it would be very difficult. It is going to be very difficult to do the kinds of research that the NIH and the NSF, for example, fund with a much reduced indirect costs level, obviously, right? But just to say it here, so we can kind of like establish the baseline of this conversation. So there is a tight relationship between higher ed and the US government for the purpose of advancing science and other, probably other less good purposes, but whatever. Okay. So the universities have built themselves around access to those funds. Many universities have, right? And so universities have built your criteria for tenure around those funds in many cases. So again, depending on the kind of university you go to, depending on the research program of the university, whether it's an R1 or an R2 or a SLAC or what kind of university it is, you as a professor have different amounts of pressure and sometimes requirement on you to go out and win federal grants. And unfortunately, many people, especially in health sciences, are told you must get an NIH grant to get tenure. You need to get, these very specific types of grant, and you must participate in these very specific kinds of grant programs in order to gain tenure or win tenure, earn tenure at our university. That has become a requirement, especially in R1s. And that is a problem because now these programs are in the individual grants, and even already awarded funds are being drastically cut. And we don't know, part of the purpose, right, of the way that these cuts are happening is that we don't know at all. That's one thing. We don't know if they'll be reinstated, but the kinds of research that will be funded will be vastly different, right? Like, for example, maybe it will be true that you can't do health inequities research because we're not supposed to think that there are unequal or inequitable structures in our American society, right? So we don't know what's going to happen. And we don't know if funding is released, what it's going to look like, what the programs are going to look like. We don't know what the indirect cost cap are going to be. For example, I have seen that the indirect costs, they're playing with 15% as the upper limit on indirect costs, where many of these grants have a 50 or 60% indirect cost rate. And it will be, I'm not going to say impossible because I do not like to use the word impossible when it comes to universities and colleges and higher ed institutions. And I'll explain more why in a second. But it becomes very difficult, or things would need to be structured very differently if the university is doing the kinds of research that many of these programs fund, and they're not getting that big indirect cost amount. So that's the situation. And many of you have been already harmed by the situation. And I want to say the word harm because some of you have lost your own funding in things that you were in the middle of doing, which means that you may have had grad students who are no longer getting paid, or postdocs, or other people who are on staff with you suddenly have no source of funds. And that is harmful to those people. Some of you might not be able to apply for a grant that, if you had gotten it, would have secured tenure for you. So that is also very harmful. Plus, I mean, just the way that many of these programs that were about racism or sexism or discrimination or equity or equality, many of these types of programs, you're now being told this is not research that's worth doing. Similarly, climate change and these kinds of things, right? It is harmful because it makes you stop and say, like, wait, so everything that I have built and everything that I have created and the work that I feel called to do in the world is now not worthy. So how to think about this? I don't want to say what to do or actually, I'm not going to say, first I'm going to talk about observations about what people are doing. Okay. So here's something that I want to call out and give a little warning about as well. So one of the things that I'm seeing is that when these cuts are happening, these grants that are in the middle of, the grants is running and funds are frozen. One of the things I'm seeing is that people at the department chair level, like the program, like maybe a research center level, department chair level people, which is like the equivalent of kind of middle management in the higher ed, at least in the States, right? They're not upper admin, they're not deans or provosts, right? It's the department chair. It's the people who are kind of managing the everyday workings of the departments that create the programs that students are in that make a university, right? And I'm seeing people at that level, department chairs, people who are program directors, heroically acting to save those people who would have been kind of immediately fired by the funding cuts or by the funding freezes. I'm using the word heroic because they are working so hard to figure out how to not, have to let somebody go from one day to the next, or how to continue operating when funding freezes have happened. And I'm seeing them take on the emotional burden of that, the extra time burden as well, because any of you who are department chairs who have worked at that level of admin know that it's par for the course that weird stuff happens and you have to deal with it all the time. So just the everyday workings of a department, on all of the weird stuff that happens on top of that. So it's a time burden as well. It's an emotional burden. It's a time burden. And these are people who are already emotionally burdened and time burdened. And what I see is program directors and leaders and department chairs figuring things out, doing all the work to figure out how to move through and past and deal with funding freezes. All the kind of hard work is being done by those people. And I'm also seeing a ton of like creative thinking and connection building and all the like truly, truly heroic work being done to mitigate the effects of funding freezes. So hats off to you. And you cannot save everyone's job by yourself. You can't take on all of the responsibility that is actually upper admin's responsibility. You can work with upper admin, but if you are in this position, if you have suffered funding freezes, if you're in a leadership position in your department or college and you are trying to mitigate the effects of funding freezes, I just want you to know that even though you are doing amazing, trying to help, it is unfair for you to take on the burden of saving everyone from funding freezes. That burden should happen at the utmost institutional level. Now, if you are in partnership, if you're working with your university president and your deans and the dean of research, and you are working with them to come up jointly with a plan, and you are being resourced to do that by having extra help in the office or by extra course release time or whatever, other types of support, okay. But if you're not, please take a minute and think about whose responsibility it is to save your institution from an assault that you did not make. You know, that is not your fault, and it's not your professor's fault. It's not your fault at all. So that's my kind of observation plus a warning. My observation is that the burden of mitigating the effects of these funding freezes is falling too much on the shoulders of department chairs and whatever other positions you might call middle management. And meanwhile, what's happening at the upper admin levels in many places. So please, like if your university is an exception to this, like please send me an email and tell me about it, because what I'm looking at is the major institutions in the US, the most famous, the most well-resourced institutions in the US, like Yale. What I'm seeing is them saying, okay, I'll keep my head down, right? We'll just try to get through this. We're seeing Columbia University capitulate to a list of the federal government's demands. Completely bonkers stuff, like hard to believe. But it's not hard to believe because institutions will save themselves. Now, I am not the first, but I know that on this podcast, I often kind of personify institutions and ignore the fact that institutions are obviously made up of people, individual people. But an institution like Yale, an institution like Columbia, like, let's be real. Let's be real. How long do you think it would take Columbia to go find the $400 million that the federal government was going to freeze and was going to withhold from them? How long do you think that would take? It's Columbia. You know, like they would go, they make a few calls to a few donors. Maybe it would take 6 months, but I think that's a lot. You know, they don't want to do that. They want to take the attitude of, I'm going to keep my head down. I'm going to do what the government says, and we are going to survive. Now, do I want universities to survive? Yes. However, even the most powerful, the most famous, the most well-resourced, deepest pockets universities are going to take I'm going to put my head down and try to survive attitude to what is happening. It hasn't even been 3 months, or maybe it's been a little over 3. It hasn't even been 4 months that we've been with this current administration and their shenanigans and their like, the professors are the enemy rhetoric. They are not defending you. So they're not defending you. You cannot save everyone from funding freezes. You personally cannot. Thank you for trying. Thank you for your heroic efforts. Also, not your job. And of course, you want to be a contributor, but it's being a contributor to fixing the problem, not the only one fixing the problem. The upper admin has to decide who they're going to be in this moment. The same way you have to decide who you're going to be in this moment. So this is just to kind of give you my take. Like that is my take on what's happening right now. As usual, so this is my take. As usual, universities will save themselves. The institution of the university will survive. They will adapt, they will mold, they will bend. Ooh, they'll bend over backwards to survive. If they need to cut you to survive, they will. If they need to stop defending you, if they ever did, if they need to stop defending you to survive, they will. They do not have your back. All right. So what are we going to do now? So here's just some practical things to start to think about. And then I want to get back in every one of these upcoming, I think I have, how many do I have planned? I have 6 or 7 podcast episodes planned about, kind of dealing with current events in higher ed. And I want this to be the main message of each one. The most important thing right now for you to do is get very, very deeply clear on who you are, what you stand for, and what your work in the world is. What is the work for you? Because those are the things that are going to determine what choices you make in order to have the career that you want. So many people in higher ed have made careers by following the funding. And this is not a judgment. This is an observation. Something becomes popular and very fundable all of a sudden, right? There's becomes like a lot of programs about it. And then a person who maybe was doing tangentially related research or research not at all about that decide, oh, there's funding in this area, so I'm going to follow that. And you can make a beautiful career that way. There's again, no judgment. However, in times like these, where you don't know if there's going to be funding, where the things that you talk about in your research might now bar you from funding, right? Like they might disqualify you from funding. In these moments, you need to figure out what you're going to do. Like you need to figure out who you are and how you're going to build your career. And my suggestion for you, or I invite you to really think about, what is my work in the world? What do I want to be doing? What research questions are important to me? What is the work for me? And, another way to think about this is your academic mission, right? But your values, that core you that you have, I was listening to a podcast the other day of a coach that I follow, a life coach that I follow. And she was like, the reason I do things is because I have to go to bed with me every night and I have to wake up with me every night. And so if I act out of integrity with myself, the person who is suffering is me. So I want you to think about who do you need to be? What does your career need to be so that you can, calmly go to bed with yourself every night and calmly wake up with yourself happily every morning, right? So that's the main message that I'm going to continue to repeat in different ways throughout the next few weeks. Who are you? Who do you want to be? What is your work in this world? And the answers to those questions shape your career decisions, not the other way around, right? I mean, obviously your career decisions are in conversation with or are co-created with the institutions, with the funding opportunities. Yeah. But now more than ever, you really need to be like clear on who you are and what your work in this world is. So as you're thinking about that question, there's a few things to continue to think about. One is there are other sources of funds besides the major US government-based sources of funds. There are private foundations. Private foundations will not replace the volume of funding from US government programs. And I wonder whether like how untouchable those foundations are as well from, it seems like this administration is very happy to, I'm going to use the word persecute, people with certain ideologies. And so if a foundation has those ideologies, like who's to say they're not going to come after those foundations? But let's say they won't. Let's just say that. One thing you should start to do is, and this is something that wasn't encouraged by your university probably, because your university was probably telling you to go get the big federal money. Well, now you need to be aware of the different kinds of funding agencies that are out there. Foundations, nonprofits, that kind of thing. Again, in no way will they replace the volume or even the types of funding of the federal government. But hey, we can do what we can do. Start looking for other kinds of alternative funding programs. Become familiar with how your university is funded. So is your university mostly donor funded, alumni donor funded? Is it corporate funded, right? There's lots of corporations that sponsor universities. I'm thinking about, Michigan State has the Kellogg Center, right? Because Kellogg, the same people who made the cereal, are funding buildings and that kind of thing at the university. Like it's the money coming from the state, your own individual state. And what are your state's priorities? What are opportunities for state programs that might be out there for you? So thinking about those alternatives and thinking about private funding as well. And that's why I say find out who is funding your university, like who the donors are, because it might get to a point where you're like, well, let me call some people up and see if I can wrangle my own funding. So those are some things that you could try to do. The other thing that I would really encourage you to do, and I'm not trying to be alarmist here, but I am trying to express some urgency. Spend your money. If you have money right now because you have startup funds, or maybe you still have a grant that hasn't been frozen, or you have access to, like, let's say your university gives you a certain amount of money in professional development or travel funding every year. As universities are facing cuts from federal funding, cuts to the indirect costs that they get from federal funding, they will come for your funding. So I have a client who got hired with a startup package, got to the university. It is now March. They've been there since August, and now their startup package is frozen. The university took away their startup package. So that person only got to spend whatever she spent from August until now. Spend your money, because apparently every cut is on the table. So if you want to use that money, use it right now. So that's my advice to you. Of course, if you're looking for something to do and you've thought about, oh, maybe I'll do Navigate if I have $3,000 left over, at the end of my startup money or anything like that, don't wait. Do it now. Do everything now, as much as you can. Spend that money, because they can't take away from you money that you've already spent. All right. I want us to have conversations about this. I think, and this is another thing I will try to emphasize in every episode going forward here, what will get us through is connection with each other. It is community and connection and working towards our purpose. That is what is going to get us through the immediate future here. So I encourage you, if you have friends at other universities and you can start to have, meetups or times where you can touch base and compare notes, if you have been flailing in your own, like, I don't really know what my purpose is, it's the time to do the inner work to figure that out. Because what is good about the knowledge making that you do, like what is good about knowledge making and what is good about universities is you. You are the thing. You are the thing that makes students want to stay. You are the thing that makes new knowledge and creates new perspective and new things in the world and solves the world's problems. It's you. So you need to protect yourself as the asset, right? Like protect your brain. Think about, what can I do to make myself, and we're going to be talking about this also in the podcast, how can I feel more in control of an uncontrollable situation? Where do I want to put my focus so that I feel powerful and I feel in control? Those are things that we can talk about here on the podcast. If one of the things that you have wanted to do for a long time is publish your stuff and you have a backlog of papers, our next Navigate cohort starts in May, and we are enrolling in April. If you go to the website and you go to scholarsvoice.org/navigate and you see the pink button, it'll either say apply now or join the waitlist. Do one of those two things. And we will make sure to send you all the information that you need in order to apply and join us in May. In May, just so you know, we meet on Wednesdays at noon Eastern. And I'm not just trying to get you to buy the program, right? Like, I am trying to emphasize to you that knowing who you are and what you want and taking control of your career so that you can have a career, so that you can do your work in the world. That is what Navigate is about. Like, yes, it is about that at its core. It's disguised as a writing and publishing program. But what you will get out of it is what I just said. So if you're ready to work on that in community with other people under my leadership, I'm the one who runs the program. There's not other coaches. It's just me. Come and join us in the summer, because these are the kind of conversations that we have. We talk about, okay, this happened this week. This is how we're dealing with it. This is how it's affecting my writing and publication. This is how it's affecting the choices that I'm making around my work. I want to be in that conversation with you. So go ahead to scholarsvoice.org/navigate, apply or get on the wait list, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.